Greetings, I'm Richard Groda, and this interview is part of the Tennessee Board of Regents Oral History Project. It's December 7th, and we're here on the campus of Motlow State Community College. And with me now is Dr. MaryLou Apple. MaryLou, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you, MaryLou, to introduce yourself, but I will say, let me, in broad terms, not the immediate past president, but a recent past president of Motlow State. And since stepping down from that capacity, you're a member of the Board of Regents. Right. So we're going to talk in both of those capacities. Okay. But again, welcome. And if you would, a little bit more about your background and when you first started in higher education and bringing it today, or actually, in your case, before higher education.
Before. Well, my background is in nursing, and I received my degrees from the University of Tennessee. So I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in nursing. And it was during 1977 that I was practicing nursing that I learned about the community college. I had students that were there for clinicals, and I became interested in their mission and their concepts and got to know a lot of the professors, and it was at Walter State Community College in Morristown, Tennessee. And later they said, would you be interested in teaching? I really hadn't thought about teaching before because I love the patient contact, but I also love seeing those students when they, achieved a skill that they were nervous about. So I came aboard in 77 at Walter State and stayed there until 82. I left for a year when my husband was transferred to the Upper East Tennessee area, and I went to teach for ETSU for a year. And then we moved back to the Morristown area. So I came back to Walter State and continued. So healthcare was my area. I started as a nursing instructor and then later became the dean of all the health programs and then eventually the VP of academic affairs for Walter State. And then I left and became the president at Motlow State Community College. And in between there, I served 8 years in the military.
Kind of remember that.
Yes.
Yeah, in between your parts, in your spare time.
In the spare time.
Yeah. Well, very good. So you you're familiar with community college within the Regents system, Walter State, and then ETSU, which up until recently was a Board of Regents university. So if you would talk a bit about from your different perspectives, what were the major issues and dynamics with your institution and the Board of Regents?
So if you start early on, and when I was looking at the questions, I was thinking about what did I really think about the Board of Regents when I came in as a little instructor, and a couple of the things I thought was like the Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain type thing, or a little mystery, mystic. I knew who they were. I mean, that was public knowledge. You would know their names and, you could get on, not online at that time, but you could get into the system and find out who was representatives. But a lot, they were kind of the group that made decisions. I never spoke to one of them before. I didn't go to board meetings. Really had no contact whatsoever for them. So for me, as an instructor, it was kind of a real distant relationship. And I knew they made decisions because I would be told when those decisions were made and that we were going to enact those decisions. So it's interesting now, many years later, to see, to actually be serving on the Board of Regents and see all the changes and especially about the communication now. And I think the transparency and the increase in the communications with all constituents and the public agenda and how important that has become and what a driver it is in our education. A lot has changed over the years.
Yeah. And so at what point in your career did you start having, you mentioned communication, but contact with members of the board staff?
When I probably became the vice president of academic affairs was really the first time that I had a lot. And during that time we had, I think Charles Smith was during that time as the chancellor of the system. And in my area, my president at the time at Walter State was Jack Campbell. Mm-hmm. And then Jack Fishman was on the board and was in that area. And, now that you actually said that, there's a lady that was up in Upper East Tennessee, and I failed to remember her name, but I did get to know her too.
Who was a member of the board?
Yes.
Leslie Pope?
Leslie Pope. And I got to know her daughter as well.
Sure.
That's right. Yes. And so those, when you talk about instrumental people, are people who really kind of influenced me or I knew made me maybe understand a little bit more what they were doing and what they were about. It was still, even as vice president, you really didn't approach them, so to speak, and really talk about your issues. You needed to go to your president, and the president talked to them about the issues. So again, not huge relationships at that time of really getting to talk to them individually, but certainly beginning to understand a little bit more thorough about what their role was and how we could help be on a team.
Right. Let me ask you, while you were the chief academic officer, so where was it, like something like articulation and transfer? Was that one of the driving issues?
Oh, right. I made a list for you of how many issues there were.
Let's talk about a few of them.
Well, defining our future happened fairly early. I don't know if you remember where you were.
I remember that. That was kind of Charles Manning was the chancellor.
Right.
And it was the big umbrella was UT Board of Regents, SEAC were supposed to come up with plans for, it wasn't so much retrenchment, but honing things. Right.
And I think, I try to think back myself. You're really causing me to think back really many years.
This is good.
It's really tough. But defining our future, kind of the stimulus was when SACS, then it was just SACS, but now SACS COC, made some changes in their criteria, which was driven by the federal government. So if you're going to receive money from the federal government, then these are the things you've got to demonstrate that you can do. And one of those things was the breadth of knowledge that a person with a degree would get. Mm-hmm. And how did you know it was? And that general education was not considered to be a single entity, but rather a large expansion of knowledge. So that is what's kind of started this. And so we went through defining our future, which meant all universities and colleges at that time, we were all still together, needed to revamp all of general education. I had a name for that. It was tough. It was really tough because everyone felt threatened, like their course was being challenged. Really, it wasn't. What they were asking for is that you clearly identify what a person in East Tennessee and a person in West Tennessee and a person in Middle Tennessee who took Communications 1010, what was their outcomes? Right. What would they know at the end of that? What would they be exposed to during the time? What were your objectives? What were your learning outcomes? And we were beginning, that was kind of the beginning of this accountability that we're still seeing. Mm-hmm. It's still going, but that's kind of when it started. So that was one of the defining our future was really defining at the institution, because you had to get everyone on board and convince them, it's not threatening. What you need to do is just step up to the plate and demonstrate why your course is a general education course. And together across the state, are we really doing it? Because you really do need to know what's happening up in East Tennessee. Is it the same in Middle? Is it the same in West Tennessee?
Yeah. But
truly a long, maybe 2-year process in all of getting that narrowed down. And we also went from 32 hours, that in that time it was 32 hours, and we went to 41 of general education.
Right. So of the 60 hours, and then 41 were the general education core, and then the additional 19 to get up to 60 hours were pre-major.
Right, exactly. And those had to coincide with what was happening in the university. So that's when we really talked about the articulation even more in-depthly, and the universities were there with us making those decisions about those courses. So we all, even the university decided what English 1010 was, the community college what 1010 was, and we all agreed those 41 were an instant transfer.
Right. So just dawned on me, this is the thread that's been missing. So we all look to the Complete College Tennessee Act of 2010.
No.
I know. That's where it
Right.
began back there.
It did.
So it had the transfer pathways, it had that, but that's where it
That's
came
right.
from.
That's right. So it really had already occurred. What a lot of other states were dealing with, they had never done defining our future type activities. But that's when we really had a lot of big discussions and a lot of feeling of threatening, not understanding why now does the state want us to step up and do that. But the accountability started, and that's when I feel like as an educator that more of the public agenda began to come more into focus, into play. Before that, I just felt like, again, that mystic thing, things went on and decisions were made. But I think then is when I really saw the public agenda was kind of a driving force.
Yeah, well, I think up until then, there really was no cohesion. There really was well-intentioned efforts, but not
Right.
put in a bigger framework, I
Exactly.
think. So back to you, moving ahead. So you became president here, and from being a chief academic officer. And so what were your, about going back to the Wizard of Oz days, so again, were there any more curtains that were lifted about how things?
Well, if you remember, I came in 2006 here as president and was just here briefly before we started into a decline in finances. You remember what happened in 2008.
Yeah.
And so we began what we called the downsizing. Across the state, we were all given a number that we had to decrease our budgets. We had 2 years to get it accomplished. That's very tough when you begin to set and you think about jobs. It's people's livelihood. You know those individuals. You know what they're doing. You don't really feel like you have a lot of fluff in your budget. So, for me, it was a little over $2 million that I need to get done. Now, I'm not a huge institution here. $2 million represents a lot of jobs, is what it did, because 82% of my budget, it was salaries and benefits. So there was no way to cut $2 million plus without it being jobs. That was a very difficult time.
Yeah.
Very, very hard times. And you really had to start making your plan. And if you didn't have the plan, and so you would know who was on the list. I mean, you would know where you were thinking about making the cuts, and you had to think about the student. I mean, what did the student, you couldn't think about the person, you had to think about the students you serve. And where did the bulk of those students, what did they need, and where did you need to teach, and what did you need to teach?
Wow. Yeah.
Okay, so that was a long 2 years. And people felt threatened. It was hard to reassure people at the time that you were doing everything you could to try to save jobs or move them into positions that would help our students. We went through a natural attrition. We decided right away that when somebody left, we were really going to reassess that to see if we could merge it, bring it online, do away with some things. What could we begin to do? Ultimately, we did a buyout, which was really, really tough. To get people, characteristically, you look at our schools, they just stay. People love the community college. They like what they're doing. It's hands-on. That's why we love it. We work with the students. Mm-hmm. So, no, a lot of people don't leave. But it worked out that we ended up, through attrition and the buyout, we were able to downsize without really doing a reduction in force.
Yeah. So this was during the recession.
Right.
When Tennessee, like other states, revenues just were
Right, so
dropping.
funding was very difficult during that time.
And there was no money for capital.
No.
So, welcome to the presidency.
Right. And when you say, right, that's right, welcome. And I remember one of the former presidents telling me, oh, yeah, I was in the day when we had plenty of money, plethora. You could just do all the initiatives you wanted to do. And I'm thinking, I don't think I'm ever going to see those days. And we never did see those days. But, we grew and we came closer together. But you mentioned the building. At the same time, not only, it was kind of like a double whammy. Not only were we decreasing in our funding, but then they decided to start having a matching. Do you remember where the match started? For every building that you wanted now, you had to come up with a percentage of the money. That was brand new too. And then here we were. So in 2009, I was out trying to raise $3.2 million to get a really badly needed building in Smyrna. And those were tough times. And I can remember some of the former presidents telling me, we didn't give you zero chance of getting that money. Now they tell me that. They didn't tell me then. I was getting them all together like, we got to go get this money. Students, you know, they really, really need us to come through for this. And thankfully the community did come through.
Yeah.
But those were tough times.
Yeah. Mm. Well, let's talk about that for a minute, that Smyrna campus. So, gosh, there's a new building coming up out of the ground. That's the third building?
The third building.
And is there a fourth one on the drawing board?
There is. I'm not sure where it is in the whole framework, but all that framework has changed even since I've left the system, which is it's much more current in that now when you have a need, you're not put at the bottom of the list and work your way up. And that's how the buildings used to be. So you may be on what you thought 10 years ago you needed, and what you needed when your building came up could totally be different in 10 years. So I think they have a much better system now.
Well, again, money is not abundant, but it's not like it was.
Right, exactly.
During that little period.
Mm-hmm. It's very tough.
Yeah, you're bringing back some not so good memories, but that was also when we had federal dollars for operating purposes.
Yes.
And which was much appreciated.
Yes.
But that
it was a 2-year window.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it was better than being told you had to cut in, 6 months and make that decision, right? I mean, it did give you, but you had to really think about your strategy and really keep the student at the center of it, because your instinct is to try to save everybody's jobs,
mm-hmm.
but the goal has to be, and our mission is about educating students. So you really had to, keep the student at the focus.
Yeah, boy. So I want to jump ahead now to the role of the Board of Regents, but is there anything else about that we really ought to talk about while you were president, and what kind of some of the mega trends or some of the...
Well, the Complete College Act, I mean, I don't want to jump over that, because
Sure.
while it wasn't a lot for us about changing courses and articulations and all that, I think we were doing a really good job of that. That doesn't mean that there's students that didn't have issues, but we usually, if they would come forward, we usually could work those out. But what Complete College Act did do is start, talking about everybody looking more alike and programs being identical and, looking the same.
A more cohesive...
Right.
Was the term I may have been...
Right.
But yeah.
And there is research that shows that our students, they call them swirl. They take a course
Yes.
over here and they take a course over here. But when you really look at where they're getting a degree, they usually kind of come back to where they took a bulk of their studies. And so to think sometimes that a program had to be identical here, that maybe was built for Nissan, but then the same program is being used by FedEx in the West End of Tennessee. There are small differences that need to take place, because not all those companies function the same way. They need, maybe much like the general education, they need a bulk of it to be the same, but then they need some flexibility in that. And I think we, once again, went running down the course to, let's just get this done, put it in place, and everything look alike. And thankfully, after years of trying to, knock that down and say, well, it doesn't really work. We had business and industry stepping up and saying, no, you can't get rid of this. I need that. And so it did end up saying, we're a community college. We should be about the community. Mm-hmm. So in this area, this is what they need. Now, it doesn't mean that a student, we would accept students. Goodness, we, in the nursing field, when some of these horrific Mother Nature episodes happen in other states, that students would come in, well, we'd take that student in, we would assess them, see where they were. I mean, that's the beauty of a community college. They're really about the students. So I think, that was a hard time for people to try to remember our roots of where we were, and we're serving this area.
Mm-hmm. Right. Anything else about the Complete College? Because that really was, in many, changed the formula.
Well, that was a huge, because to bring everybody aboard that today it's about head count. and tomorrow it's about output and student success. It was definitely it definitely was the right thing to be looking, to be assessing. It was another story bringing along thousands of people who've been under a system that thought differently. And even our current president, when he was saying, what's the first people ask you? Because it's just inbred in you. What's your enrollment? That's still the answer now. What's your enrollment? It's not about enrollment. And it's a conversation, even though, we were 2018, and that happened in 2010.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so 8 years. And our conversation is still about, and people still want to know, what's your head count?
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to take years. And that's the point, I think, about the Complete College Act. It doesn't happen overnight, especially when you've been bred for years about it being a head count.
Oh, yeah. Square footage.
Right. So it was a little quick. When we were talking about a while ago, we had 2 years to adjust to, a change in what your practices were. Maybe 2 years is a time to adjust a complete state in a system to, how do you migrate to it? So it was hard. It was hard on the institution. It was hard to get down to start having that conversation.
Yeah, because I remember that was passed hurriedly in a special session.
Right.
And with legislative, in the statute, when the first new formula would go into effect to basically generate the funding recommendation for the next fiscal year. But yeah. Well, from the other, when you're not on a campus, the other perspective is, well, that's what it takes to get it done.
Right.
But there is some, when you're
and I think that's a really good point you bring up. And your questions made me start thinking about that on both sides of the fence. Like, how do you do it? Because in some ways, there are some things that need to be done at the system and just said, here's the policy for this, especially things coming out of the federal government and, the safety issues, a lot of things that we're all dealing with. Instead of letting each campus do that, I think it would have been helpful to have a little discussion back and forth with the campuses, because I think they could have come up. I know nursing, for instance, was really adamant in being that's my background. I totally understand. You could never have everybody in this state at every institution having pediatrics taught on the same semester, because there's not enough pediatric clinicals for them. That's a real simple example.
No, but it's a great example.
But it can't be done. But no one asked about that. And that's the kind of conversations that I think, yes, there are some things that do need to be done quickly and get them in place as quickly as you can. But there are some things that maybe need to have an avenue that can be brought back to the table for discussion.
Yeah. Well, of course, then the Drive to 55 was kind of just in place. And, well, I was going to say the Complete College Tennessee Act, was still kind of wet. And
right.
We launched right into the Drive to
Exactly.
55. So that was an experience to be a part of, wasn't it?
Right, exactly. And once again, good initiatives. And that's where I see such a change about us going toward the public agenda from the early days when I came on board. Is I see more of us answering to the public, why do we not have trained individuals to take these jobs? Why do we not attract higher paying jobs? The job market. And those are all valid questions. And not only just a skill, because I think a lot of people think we let liberal arts go to, but no, our leaders, our CEOs, there are a lot of people that we need with the paragraph, that we have, a perspective on all different types. But I think it was just, it was tough and going to it. The right thing, once again, a right goal, but you're right. We just came off a complete college and went into to Drive to 55. But I will say the colleges handled it well.
Yeah,
they excelled in it because I think it was focused on the student.
Mm-hmm.
It was, it went with what we love to do. So I think that was a big help to it. What they wanted to be assured, though, at the college level, if you go back to the college level, they wanted to know that you weren't just passing people. That was a big thing. That academically, that they were meeting the standard. And that's what we had to hold to, at least on the campus level, is no, academics has to stay there. What we need to ask ourselves is, how do we help bring the student up? What additional initiatives and key quality indicators can we use to bring those up? How do we help retain the students? How do we help teach them in a different way? Maybe they have a different learning style. What can we do to get the student to the mark, not lower the mark?
Yeah. So when you were named to the board as a member of the Board of Regents, that was Governor Haslam's appointment. And what year was that?
In 15.
15. So the year before. So the universities were still under the Board of Regents at that time, but then right after that.
Right.
So I don't even. Well, was it different? No. So I guess what were your kind of thoughts about all that, as far as you had been obviously a president and a academic leader under the old board, and things were going to change? What were your thoughts about that?
And so I had a discussion with the governor about that when he called me to ask me what I thought about that. And, my response was, okay, I have only worked in a system in Tennessee where it's been that we are all together. And what I can't tell you that I think it won't work. I can only tell you what I know has been working. And so what I would say to you, if that is the direction that you're going in, could we please make sure that we kept the articulation and the relationships that we have? Because what we don't want to do is have a lot of independence going on, and then we drift apart from all that work that we did back in defining our future and coming together and making it right for our students. That academically we were strong, we had assessed ourselves, we were continuously improving those. We just didn't want to lose ground.
And?
So I think it's too early to say. I was on the transition team for Focus to make the transition.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about that transition.
So we had the University of Tennessee there, and the independent colleges there, and the community colleges there, and the universities there. I mean, we were all, and the TCAS at that time, the technical colleges now. So we were all at the table, and everyone was bringing input from their constituents on what was happening. And of course, there was a lot of just what I call legal aspects to it. Our policies were just totally written for what we were, not what we were becoming. That was a huge overhaul right there. But I think the intent of the conversation kept going back to, what about the student?
Yeah.
Okay, let's make sure the student doesn't get hurt. How are we going to make sure the student sees this as seamless? They shouldn't be dealing with the changes. Could it be seamless? And then a lot of people, and you still read about it now, were afraid that, it'd be more costly to the taxpayers. They had some concerns at that time. I think it's yet to be seen. I think it's a little early. As I said, sometimes you have to let things play out, and then you can look behind. It's hindsight, right? But in this case, I had nothing to compare it to. And so I said, what I just hope is we don't lose all the hard work that we've gotten to on this point.
Right. Well, and your point's well taken. I keep thinking about our mutual colleague, Bert Bach, and his baseball metaphors. Yes. But this is the early innings. And
that's right.
Some things are going to happen along the way.
That's right. And I hope good things happen along the way.
Yeah.
But I hope that we have enough. And one of the things that we fought for is that some of us were old. We called ourselves the senior people on this team. And we're going to be moving out of the picture. And at that time, I knew my retirement, and I knew I was leaving. And, one of the things we said is, the people who've gone through that, they're going to remember it, right? I mean, it's going to be very current to them. But remember, new generations coming in, they didn't go through defining our future. A lot of them didn't go through Complete College Act. They just entered the system. So they don't know what can happen if we're not united in a comprehensive educational system.
Yeah. I thought those would be appropriate words where we should conclude. That was great.
Excellent.
Right.
Thank
MaryLou,
you.
thank you so much.
You're so
This
welcome.
has been wonderful.
You're so welcome.
Right.
Good luck on the whole project.
It's a good project.
Yeah, it
Keep you
is.
posted.
It is. I bet it'll be fun.